but I'm very excited to be speaking here with you all today. And then after I leave, Gabe can answer any questions. But we are Crosstown LA, and our basic mission at the whole is empowering communities through data journalism. So first, a little bit about Crosstown and kind of where this initiative came from. We noticed that there was a huge problem with local news facing a financial crisis. As you can see from some of the headlines, local journalism is very difficult to keep up with in today's society. And even as local outlets shutter, our population and diversity is still growing, especially in a community like Los Angeles. So it's really difficult to cover all of the different communities within this county and really address all of their problems adequately. So the consequences of this is that there are just massive news deserts that are rapidly expanding, and a growing number of communities don't get the regular news coverage. So there's also less government accountability and no community voice, which obviously is a main concern for a lot of like neighborhood councils as well, because that's exactly what they're trying to bring about to their communities. So our solution is to investigate LA through numbers. So we create news and data narratives that are tailored to every community, which is usually impossible with actual traditional news models. So we bring this data together and try to bring down the costs of covering local communities just to ensure that no one is left out in these stories. So the end goal is that we want to make all of this data accessible and free for the public, which it currently is right now. We just want to be able to bring more and more data to more people. So we turn this public data into accessible stories that are on our website or our newsletter. And our stories use neighborhood level statistics and reader-friendly data and visualizations that ensure just a more informed public around Los Angeles. So these are about some of our services. We actually right now have about like a 3-tier approach. So we have the data narratives that I kind of spoke on, where we collect data, organize it, and make it easily accessible to our team of journalists. And then they share those stories to the general public through our website and social media. Then we also have a personalized newsletter where we create tailored content for about 110 different neighborhoods in Los Angeles. And I'll go through about exactly how we do that a little bit later. And we deliver this newsletter to anyone that's subscribed to it each week. And then finally, we have original data visualizations where we create maps and also interactive tools to help locals better understand their own communities and make their own decisions through these maps and visualizations. So more on the data narratives. I'm sure that some of you are maybe familiar with all of the data that is publicly accessible and available to anyone that really tries to seek it out. And although it's available to the public, it's locked up in unsearchable documents or really hard to understand spreadsheets. And so it's actually very difficult to understand and actually make any assumptions or conclusions from it. So what we try to do is turn this data into local news. So our reporters, scour through, decades of data or I guess just the past decade, to break news and discover trends and deliver these neighborhood level insights. As for our personalized newsletter, this is kind of what the screen looks like when you go to sign up for it. And we try to deliver news tailored to individual communities. Like I said, we cover 110 different neighborhoods across Los Angeles, and these are just samples of what it might look like. So it includes a greeting at the top with maybe like 3 to 5 stories with specific data and details about each neighborhood. And so you go to the page to sign up for the newsletter, and you can put in your name and your email address and select as many different neighborhoods as you want. And we'll send a newsletter with corresponding data and updates on topics like crime, construction, traffic, and other areas of data that might be of interest. And so everyone gets the same kind of data, but it's tailored to your specific community. And that's how it's on a neighborhood level. And finally, our data visualizations are to bring the data as close to the consumer or the reader as possible. So we convert it into digital tools that allow you as the reader to explore and kind of chart your own narrative. So we develop a library of custom data visualizations that our journalists can also use to tell stories in fresh ways. And this is a sample of one of the maps that we might have. So we try to create tools and dashboards that people can also seek out on our website on their own. And locals can use our maps to track everything from like COVID-19 infections to air quality or crime at a neighborhood level. And these are some of the areas that we report on as well. So air quality, service calls, housing and homelessness, even elections. So there's definitely a lot of data to kind of dive into, and we're always trying to look for more that would be helpful to you as a community. So we have some charts pulled together specifically on data that we pulled for Sherman Oaks based on my conversations with Susan. And, we are just showing you kind of a sample of what we can provide, but obviously we want to be able to provide even further data depending on what your community needs are at the time. So one thing that I know we talked about was service calls. And so this is a chart showing from 2018 through 2022, the total service calls by month that came into the Van Nuys division of the LAPD, as well as also responses that officers made in the area, such as like while at a traffic stop. But this data, we will say, does not necessarily specify where the incident occurred, just the police division that responded. And that's how we get the data. So that's why it's the Van Nuys division of the LAPD. And then for traffic collisions, I know this is something that we also talked about in the area. So this illustrates the total number of traffic collisions that the LAPD responded to in both Sherman Oaks, Studio City, and Van Nuys. So we can also create this kind of data where you can compare to other areas that are around you. And we did want to note that the LAPD began changing their methodology in January 2021 by only responding to collisions in which there was serious injury or damage. So we can't necessarily track like fender benders or anything like that. But that's why you can see at the beginning of January, everything was a bit higher, and then they changed their methodology. And then along the same lines with traffic collisions, we can also provide data in this kind of format where we can show you a map of major traffic collisions in the Sherman Oaks area that the LAPD responded to in 2022. So you can just see kind of where those would be tracked down. And then we can also track data like the My 311 service. So this just demonstrates the number of complaints that the service has received per quarter about specifically homeless encampments in Sherman Oaks from 2018 to 2022. And then we can also track things like permits. And so this specifically looks at building permits and demolition permits issued in Sherman Oaks by quarter between 2018 to 2022. I know I breezed through these, but we can definitely dive deeper into them if you want. But this is, again, just a sample of some of the data that we can easily pull for you guys and provide kind of as frequently as you want. We can try to pull different kinds of data if you're curious about a specific aspect of any of this or anything else that we report on that we didn't necessarily show in any of these charts. So just to wrap up really quickly, this is what we can do for you guys. We can just offer this data on a regular basis through kind of neighborhood council updates by sending like a PDF, a little presentation deck, and we can bring that to meetings or maybe just send that over in email format so that you guys can look at it, generate any questions, try to figure out what to do in your community. But this also helps inform us, our current data narratives and newsletter to include the data that your community is interested in. But what you can do for us is just let us know how this data could help you or maybe has helped you even in this short, little presentation, because your personal anecdotes help us secure more grants to keep making this all possible. Again, we are a nonprofit news organization. So we really appreciate any stories about how this has helped you and how this has helped your community. And then finally, as always, we like to say that you can sign up for our weekly neighborhood newsletter and provide us any feedback. It comes out every Wednesday morning, so you'd be able to look at your inbox and find out more data about Sherman Oaks or even nearby areas if you're curious, areas that you have relatives living in. So it's definitely a very informative and great newsletter that covers a lot of LA that a lot of other services don't. So we're now kind of open for questions. This is our website, generally pretty easy to remember. It's xtown.la, or you can also email us at askus@xtown.la. I know Susan also has my phone number and personal email, so I'm happy to let her give that out to anyone that has questions as well. And thank you so much.
I think Katherine might have to go now, but I'm happy to, first of all, introduce myself and answer any questions that you might have too. So.
Yeah, and Gabe is a lot more familiar, I will say, with the data. So he's actually the one you probably want answering the questions anyway. So I'm excited for him to stay on and get into the specifics of it. And he should have access, I think, to that entire deck if you want to reference anything specifically as well. But thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to kind of corresponding in the future.
Thank you so much, Katherine, for being here. I know that was quick, but it was actually very informative. So thank you so much. Christy, you have questions?
Hi, Gabe. I feel like you've been a part of Crosstown for a while.
Correct. Yeah, and I think we might have met in a previous neighborhood council setting. Yeah.
Yes. Hi. So thank you for this. And I did have a question on the slide, page 20. She made the comment that of the 311 calls, she could give us a number of which ones were complaints about homeless. So you can actually drill down the 311 calls for our area.
We can drill them down, we can map them. So yeah, so we can record basically how many 311 calls there were about homeless encampments over time. We can compare it to Van Nuys, to other neighborhood, other areas if you want to get a little perspective. And then we could also tell you where those calls were supposed to, which encampments they were supposed to address. And we could do that with graffiti, we could do it with, you know, water waste calls, things like that.
Okay, I have two other questions. She said that you could build our report however we wanted, but is there a list of choices? I wouldn't even thought to ask.
What we've done is take all the data that the city puts out and divide it up by neighborhood. So for example, every time that there is a crime that occurs, such as a catalytic converter theft or something like that, there's a location for that. So we can look and say, well, in Sherman Oaks, this is how many catalytic converters were stolen over the past X number of years, and this is how it's changed over time. And then we could even say, these are the blocks in which they were stolen.
Okay, my final question is, for the reports that come out, how timely is the data? Is it a month delay or is it a few weeks? We
would have most of this data within 10 days of the event actually happening. So for example, with a building permit, if you wanted to know how many demolition permits there were in Sherman Oaks or something like that, that data we would have probably 3 to 4 days after it happens. Some of the crime data takes 10, 11 days to go up in the system.
So Gabe, is this public information that you're just accessing for?
Yeah.
Categorizing this data. Okay, so it's available to everybody, but somehow you're able to, I guess, organize it in a way that is presentable and understandable and easily accessible.
So I guess the metaphor would be the city made a giant haystack of data available, and we're helping people find needles in that haystack because it's difficult to decipher. And so we're just making it more accessible, and we're a nonprofit newsroom, and so we're just trying to do this as part of a mission to improve local news.
So how many people do you have on your staff looking at all of this stuff and filtering through everything?
Sure. So we've got about 3 reporters who are part-time, and 1 editor, and then we have a number of software engineers who work on the system as well, and some designers who help us, present it. And so the thing about the data is, like, if you had a question of, how many more stolen cars were there in Sherman Oaks for the last 3 months of the year compared to the previous 3 months or 2 years ago or something like that, I could tell you that within 30, 40 seconds.
Wow, that's incredible. And then this is free to people?
Yeah, so we have a neighborhood newsletter every week that we send out with data about Sherman Oaks. And we do that for each neighborhood in the city with its own sort of like, hey, this week, in fact, we talked about catalytic converter theft because the last 3 months of 2022, it was an 85% increase in the number of catalytic converters stolen from the previous 3 months. So it was just insane. And so we try to give each neighborhood their own perspective about how that was impacting them.
So each neighborhood can specifically request this data?
Yeah. So we basically produce, again, with the magic of computer science, 110 different newsletters each week, but we don't have to write 110. We write 1, and then it's formatted with the data for each neighborhood, if that makes sense. So Pacific Palisades, San Pedro, Chatsworth, everywhere in between.
And then you publish it on your website,
We send out a newsletter, and we find interesting stories in the data that we publish on the website. And the website is xtown.la. We're here to help you guys get a handle on different issues that you're grappling with, right? Once you can quantify it, it's sometimes easier then obviously to see, are things getting better or worse, or what should we be focusing our attention on, things like that. So we're here to help you guys make those decisions. The only thing that we ask is if you find this useful, we want to know in the ways in which it's useful and just tell us how you use it so we get better at doing our job.
How do you define the neighborhood areas? Like I know.
Great. Okay. It's a mess. I just want to tell you that. It's like the West Bank. I mean, no one can decide on the border of a neighborhood in Los Angeles, and we could spend hours talking about that. So the county has one set of neighborhood definitions for the same neighborhoods that the city uses. The city has neighborhoods that sometimes people like, we're naming this neighborhood and nobody else knows what they're talking about. Okay, so we, about a decade ago, the LA Times did this neighborhood mapping project in Los Angeles. And they spent some time thinking about it and where the border between Van Nuys and Lake Balboa should be and stuff like that, right? And they basically said, these are the neighborhoods of LA. It's not perfect, but it's the working standard. However, we also have the boundaries for your neighborhood council district, which are not always contiguous with the neighborhood.
Okay, thank you.
Or you can just email us at askus@xtown.la. And you can sign up for the newsletter on our website, which is xtown.la, and just choose the neighborhood that you want.
No, so this is great. I'm glad that you guys were here and you reached out. Well, thank you so much for presenting. I appreciate it.
Okay, and thank you guys for being volunteers in this, council, which is really important. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.